What happens when world's two biggest superpowers quietly being negotiating over most dangerous oil choke points on the earth? And what does it mean that China suddenly offers help to reopen Strait of Hormuz while America is already at the war with Iran? Tonight, the geopolitical chessboard just became far more complicated. Hi, this is Navya Bal and you're watching TimesXP. In a stunning revelation after his high-stakes summit in Beijing, US President Trump has claimed that China and Chinese President Xi Jinping personally assured him that China would not provide military equipment to Iran. Now pause there for a moment, because that statement alone is a strategic temperature of Middle East crisis. But Trump did not stop there. According to the US President, Xi Jinping also offered China's help in reopening the Strait of Hormuz, the critical energy artery now blockaded after the massive months of escalation, the involving of the Iran-Israel-U.S. in the conflict. And this is not just another diplomatic gesture. The Strait of Hormuz carries nearly 1/5 of the world's most important crude oil supply. And when Hormuz closes, the world economy feels it. Fuel prices rise, supply chains shake up, and markets panic. And well, the energy-dependent nations begin circulating a very high-risk zone. But China may not be fully entering the war militarily. However, Beijing clearly does not want this crisis to spiral into a global economic disaster. Why? Because China depends heavily on the Middle Eastern oil, far more than the United States does. And US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent openly admitted that reopening Hormuz is very much in China's interest. And that changes everything. Because now Beijing is in a long-standing, quietly on the stand lines. It is positioning itself as stabilizing power, potentially even as a mediator. Well, at least publicly. However, there is another layer there. Chinese state media noticeably avoided especially mentioning Hormuz in the reports about the Xi Jinping talks. And that silence matters because Beijing is trying to walk a dangerous diplomatic line, and on the sides maintaining strategic ties with Iran, on the other hand preventing direct confrontation with Washington while protecting the global trade routes. And then comes the most sensitive part. Trump says Xi Jinping also wants a deal with Iran. A deal? Not escalation, no expansion of the war, a deal. But can diplomacy still work after months of airstrikes, naval blockade, and also rising military tensions across the Gulf? Well, the answer remains deeply uncertain, because the blockade of the Hormuz can actually already disrupted one of the world's most important energy corridors. And after every week passing, well, these increase pressure on the global economy. Tonight, the world is watching two powers trying to prevent a regional war around and becoming something much larger. But the history has shown something dangerous. Something most important negotiations happen quietly. Well, right before the biggest global turning points. And right now, the silence around Hormuz may be telling us more than the speeches themselves.